That night, a Michigan blizzard turned the woods into a wall of white. Ethan was half asleep when he heard a soft scrape at his front door. Not wind, not a branch. He pulled back the curtain and froze. A pregnant bobcat stood on his porch, shivering, a thin streak of blood trailing across the snow. And just beyond the porch light, a dark shape moved in slow circles, hunting. Ethan had one choice: open the door and risk everything, or leave her to die on his steps. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't. And hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The wind had been worrying at Ethan Walker's little rental cabin for hours, not the way a normal winter storm does, but like something with teeth. It came in waves that made the pine boards creak and the window glass sing a thin, uneasy note. Outside, Upper Peninsula night was nothing but moving white, snow blown sideways, powdered and sharp, scraping the porch rails and piling up against the door in soft, stubborn drifts. Ethan lay on the couch with his boots still on, a wool blanket pulled up to his chin. The power had flickered twice before settling into a weak, steady hum. The old space heater in the corner gave off that dry metal smell that always reminded him of workshops and tired mornings. He should have been asleep. But the quiet in the cabin never stayed quiet for long. It always filled up with thoughts. A scrape sounded at the front door, not the heavy thump of a branch, not the flutter of loose siding. A scrape that repeated, slow, careful, almost polite. Ethan sat up. The room was dim, washed in the amber glow of a single lamp. His breath came out warm and visible for a second before vanishing. He listened again, holding still the way you do when you don't want to admit you're scared. Scrape, scrape. He crossed the floor, bare soles finding the cold boards, and pulled back the corner of the curtain by the door. At first he saw nothing but the porch light's cone, yellow against a blizzard, and the steps buried in fresh snow that glittered like sugar. Then something moved right, at the edge of that light. A bobcat. She stood close to the door, as if she'd been waiting for someone to answer. Her coat was a muted winter tawny, dusted with ice crystals that made the fur along her shoulders sparkle. Her ears were tufted, black tips flicking in the wind, and her whiskers were frosted white. But it was her posture that made Ethan's stomach tighten. She wasn't prowling, not hunting, not curious. She was bracing herself like a person at the end of a long, bad day. She lifted one paw and touched the door again, claws making that same careful scrape, a sound too small for the cold outside. Ethan's first instinct was the one he'd lived by since moving up here. Don't open your door to trouble. Don't bring wild things inside. Call the right people. Keep your distance. Except the right people weren't coming tonight. Cell service in this stretch of forest was a joke on a good day. And in a storm like this, the whole world felt cut off, wrapped in wool. And silence. The bobcat's sides heaved. In the porch light, Ethan saw her belly, heavy and low, pregnant. So close to birthing that the shape of her looked wrong for a hunter, like the winter had weighed her down. He cracked the door just an inch, keeping the chain on. Cold rushed in immediately, a hard slap of air that smelled like iron and pine sap. The bobcat didn't lunge. She didn't snarl. She only blinked slowly, eyes reflecting gold in the thin light, and made a quiet, strained sound in her throat, something between a rasp and a plea. Ethan's fingers tightened around the edge of the door. He told himself he was imagining it, that animals didn't beg, but in that moment it felt like she was asking anyway. A gust shoved snow into the gap. Ethan's eyes dropped to the steps. That's when he saw it. An uneven line, faint but unmistakable, dragged across the white. A smear that wasn't mud. A streak so dark it looked black until the porch light warmed it into a deep rust. Color. Blood. His chest went tight. He opened the door another inch, and the bobcat shifted, one hind leg trembling. When she tried to step forward, she faltered just a fraction, then caught herself with a stiff, stubborn lift of her shoulders. "Easy," Ethan whispered without thinking, the word coming out like breath on glass. Behind her, beyond the porch, the storm moved like a curtain. But something else moved too, low to the ground, just outside the circle of light. Ethan caught a shape, then lost it. A shadow sliding between snow-laden bushes. His mind reached for explanations. A deer, maybe, or a falling branch. But his skin didn't believe that. His skin read the air the way it had learned to after enough winters alone. This wasn't just weather. The bobcat turned her head slightly, ears angling toward the darkness. Her body didn't relax. If anything, it tightened. She was listening to something Ethan couldn't see. And then, from somewhere out there, a sound rose. Through the wind, a short, high yip, followed by another, closer. A hungry, impatient note that didn't belong to the storm. A coyote. Ethan's throat went dry. He'd heard them before, far off, echoing across the frozen lake bed. But this sounded near. Too near. He pictured yellow eyes, a muzzle lifted to taste the air, paws quiet on the snow as it circled. The bobcat looked back at Ethan. For 1 second, in that thin porch light, her gaze held his the way a person's would, steady, exhausted, urgent. Then her front legs buckled, just slightly, and she dipped toward the porch boards as if the cold had finally found the crack in her strength. Ethan swore under his breath. He could shut the door right now. He could lock it and pretend he hadn't seen her. He could tell himself nature was harsh, and that was that, but he couldn't unsee the blood on his steps. He couldn't unhear the coyote's voice, and he couldn't forget the way she had touched the door. Softly, like she'd tried every other option first. He unlatched the chain. The door opened wider, and the cold poured in, carrying snowflakes that melted on Ethan's skin like pinpricks. He grabbed the old rubber mat by the threshold and slid it onto the porch, making a rough path over the ice. His heart hammered so hard he felt it in his fingertips. "All right," he said, voice low and shaky. "If you're coming in, you come in slow, no surprises." He stepped back, leaving the door half open, giving her space like you would to someone cornered and terrified. His eyes flicked once toward the dark yard, where the wind kept swallowing shapes. He thought about homeowner insurance and emergency repairs, and how fast a small problem could turn into thousands of dollars. He thought about calling an emergency wildlife removal service, and knew deep down no one would make it out here before dawn. The bobcat took one careful step, then another. Her paw landed on the rubber mat with a wet, quiet sound. She hesitated at the threshold as if she could smell the warmth inside and didn't trust it. Then a stronger gust hit her from behind, and Ethan heard another yip. Closer now, sharper. That did it. She crossed into the cabin. Snow blew in after her, and the air changed instantly. The scent of wild fir and cold pine, sharp and clean, mixed with the warm, dusty heat of the heater. The bobcat stood just inside the doorway, shaking once, sending tiny beads of meltwater onto the floorboards. Ethan held perfectly still, hands up, palms open, trying to look harmless even though every nerve in him was screaming. Outside, something padded across the porch steps. Ethan reached back with one hand and pushed the door toward the jamb, not slamming it, just closing it with a careful, steady pressure until the latch caught. The sound was small, but final. In the dim light of the cabin, the bobcat's eyes blinked again, slow and heavy. Her belly rose and fell like a tired tide. Then she turned her head, not toward the living room, but toward the kitchen corner, as if she already knew where she needed to be. Ethan swallowed hard, the taste of adrenaline bitter on his tongue. He had opened his door to a freezing, pregnant wildcat in the middle of a blizzard. And whatever happened next was already moving in the dark outside. For a few seconds, Ethan didn't move at all. The cabin felt smaller with her inside, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. Snow hissed against the window panes, and the heater's faint click sounded suddenly loud in the hush. The bobcat stood just past the threshold, dripping meltwater onto the floorboards in dark, uneven dots, her breath puffing in short, tired bursts. The porch light leaked through the curtains in a thin amber stripe, painting her fur with a warm edge that didn't belong to the storm. Ethan kept his back to the door as he slid the deadbolt into place, slow, careful, not slamming, as if the outside might take offense. The metal thunk was small, but it landed in his chest like a weight. He could feel the cold still clinging to his fingertips, that stinging ache you get when you've been gripping something frozen. He took 2 steps back and stopped. The bobcat's eyes tracked him, not wild and darting like he expected, but heavy-lidded, focused, as if she was measuring whether he was danger or shelter. When she shifted her weight, her back leg trembled again, and he saw the reason. The right hind paw was torn near the pad. The blood wasn't pouring, but it was fresh, bright against the pale wood, and it made his stomach turn in that helpless human way. "Okay," he murmured, voice low, the way you'd talk to a skittish dog on the roadside. No touching, no panicking. He didn't have a clue what he was doing, and yet his hands moved like they did on the job, methodical, trying to solve the next smallest problem. He went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the long metal tongs he used for turning meat on the grill. He grabbed a thick dish towel, folded it into a neat square, and set it on the floor a few feet from her, like an offering. The bobcat didn't rush for it. She just stared at it, ears twitching, listening to something beyond the walls. That was when Ethan heard it too, a soft scraping sound outside, close to the door, followed by a brief snuffle that fogged the air in his imagination. His skin prickled along his arms. He stepped toward the window and lifted the blind a fraction. Nothing but swirling snow, until the wind thinned for a moment and he saw a shape low to the porch steps. Then it slipped away again, smooth as a shadow. A single yip cut through the storm, sharper now, impatient. Ethan let the blind fall back into place, heart beating hard enough to make his ears ring. He thought of calling someone, anyone, a 24/7 wildlife removal service, the county line, a neighbor. He dug his phone from his pocket, checked the screen. 1 bar flickered and died. He exhaled slowly, tasting coffee from earlier and the bitter edge of fear. The practical part of him started running numbers the way it always did. If that coyote broke a window, it wasn't just the glass. It was water damage, repairs, a claim, a deductible. He could almost hear some calm voice on the other end of a homeowner's insurance hotline asking questions he didn't have answers to. He'd come up here to keep his life simple, and now he had a wounded, pregnant wildcat in his kitchen and a predator outside his door. He filled a shallow bowl with water and slid it across the floor with his foot. Then he opened the freezer, took out a small packet of venison scraps he'd meant to cook, and held a piece out with the tongs, arm extended, keeping his body turned sideways so he didn't look like he was squaring up to her. The bobcat's nostrils flared. She took 1 careful step forward, then another, the torn paw barely touching down. When she finally took the meat, it was quick and quiet, teeth closing on it without so much as brushing the metal. The sound of her chewing was soft, wet, oddly ordinary, like it didn't belong in the middle of a blizzard. Ethan swallowed, throat tight. He watched her move toward the kitchen corner, the dimmest part of the room, where the cabinets made a little pocket of shadow. She paused there, shivering, and lowered herself onto the towel with a slow, tired sigh that sounded almost human. Outside, something bumped the porch railing, hard enough to rattle the wood. Ethan flinched and reached for the flashlight on the counter. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the cabin like a white knife. His own reflection stared back at him in the window, wide-eyed, pale, a man who'd just made a choice that couldn't be undone. He kept the light aimed at the door and listened to the storm and the breathing in the corner, because now the door was closed, and whatever had been circling outside knew exactly where she was. The storm didn't let up. It only changed its voice, sometimes a steady hiss against the siding, sometimes a sudden roar that made the roof groan like an old ship. Ethan kept the flashlight in his hand, thumb resting on the switch, as if a beam of light could hold the wilderness back. The cabin smelled like warm dust and metal heat, mixed with the sharp, clean scent of snow that still clung to the bobcat's fur. Outside, something moved again. Not the wind, not a branch. A soft, deliberate padding that came and went in the same stretch of porch, like a clock hand returning to the same mark. Ethan eased the curtain aside a sliver. The porch light made the snow look yellowed and tired, like old paper. In that narrow cone of light, the coyote appeared and disappeared, first a shoulder, then a narrow face, then those watchful eyes that seemed to reflect every bad decision a man could make. It was bigger than Ethan expected, rangy and built for hunger, coat mottled gray and tan, with darker patches along the spine. It didn't charge, it didn't panic. It simply waited, head low, sniffing the air as if the door were a seam it could pry open. A sound came from the kitchen corner, one short, hollow chuff. The bobcat had lifted her head. Her ears angled toward the door, and the muscles in her shoulders tightened under the frost-dusted fur. She wasn't tame. She wasn't grateful. She was listening, calculating, doing what wild mothers do when danger gets too close. Ethan's mouth went dry. He checked the lock again without taking his eyes off the window, then stepped quietly to the mudroom hook and grabbed his old air horn. The plastic felt brittle in his cold hand. He'd bought it the same way he bought most things lately. Practical, no frills, the kind of purchase you make when you're trying to keep life predictable. Like paying the heating bill on time. Like keeping up with home repairs. Like telling yourself you don't need a home security system because you live too far out for trouble to bother. Trouble had found him anyway. He moved around the cabin in slow, careful steps, setting little defenses the way a tired man sets plates on a table. He turned the porch light off, then on again, making the yard flash between yellow and darkness. He dragged a metal trash can lid near the door where he could grab it fast. He hung a line of empty coffee cans on a string by the porch rail earlier that evening, something he'd once seen an old-timer do, so any hard bump would rattle like church bells. The coyote tested him. It came up the steps once, just close enough that Ethan heard claws tick on wood. A faint snuffle followed, damp and intimate, like the animal was breathing on the doorknob. The sound made Ethan's skin crawl. He raised the flashlight and aimed it at the window, the beam washing over blowing snow. For a second, the coyote's face flashed into view, eyes narrowed, muzzle lifted. Then it slipped back in two, the storm as if swallowed. Ethan's heartbeat thudded in his chest, heavy and steady, like a drum in an empty room. He thought of the small savings he'd built, the kind you keep for emergencies. Storm damage repair, a busted pipe, an HVAC repair call when the furnace quits at 2 in the morning. He thought absurdly of how none of that mattered if something broke in tonight and turned this cabin into a killing ground. A sudden slam hit the side of the porch. The coffee cans clattered wildly, bright and frantic in the dark. Ethan jerked, air horn already raised. He blasted it. The sound filled the night with a harsh, mechanical scream that didn't belong in nature. Even inside the cabin, it punched his ears and made his teeth ache. The bobcat flinched, but didn't bolt. She only hunched, eyes wide for a heartbeat, then settled again, still facing the door. Outside, the coyote yelped and retreated into the swirling white. Ethan stood there trembling, the air horn still pressed to, his palm, his breath coming out in foggy bursts. He waited, listening. The storm returned to its steady hiss. The cabin returned to its dim amber glow. But the feeling didn't leave. Because he knew what predators do. They don't always give up. Sometimes they just circle wider, quieter, and come back when you're tired. In the kitchen corner, the bobcat shifted and began to pull the dish towel closer with a slow, purposeful tug, nesting, making a small pocket of safety in the only place she could. Ethan watched her, and a strange, unwanted thought settled in his chest. If she was preparing for birth, then this night wasn't just about surviving the storm. It was about surviving what came after. By midnight, Ethan had learned the first rule of having a wild thing in your house. You don't make the house louder. You make yourself smaller. He moved like he was walking through a church. Slow steps, gentle hands, no sudden clatter that might turn fear into teeth. He slid a sheet of plywood from behind the utility shelf and angled it near the kitchen corner, creating a little shadowed pocket between the lower cabinets and the wall. Not a cage, just a barrier, the way a hollow log gives cover without trapping. He laid an old quilt down, the kind that smelled faintly of cedar and laundry soap, and pushed a shallow dish of water close enough for her to reach without having to limp. The bobcat watched him the whole time, eyes half-lidded, ears flicking to the storm. She was still as a carved thing, except for the tremor that ran through her shoulders every time a gust hit the house. When Ethan finally backed away, she lowered herself into the corner with a long, careful exhale, and the room seemed to breathe again. The lamp by the couch cast a honey-colored glow across the floorboards. In that light, the bobcat's coat looked softer, warmer, almost domestic, until you noticed the tension in her spine, the way her paws stayed tucked under her like springs. She began to pull at the quilt with small, deliberate tugs, shaping it into a nest. The sound was quiet, fabric sliding over wood, a faint scratch of claw, but it landed in Ethan's chest hard because it was so unmistakably maternal. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, watching steam curl up and vanish. The heat smelled bitter, comforting, familiar. Outside, the storm tasted of iron and pine. Inside, the air had a new scent now, wild fir, snowmelt, a hint of blood. He hated the sight of that torn paw. It made him think of his own hands after long jobs, split knuckles and raw skin, the feeling that you can patch anything if you just keep going. He told himself he was being smart. He told himself this was temporary. He could call a wildlife rehabber once the weather broke. He could do everything by the book in the morning. But the truth sat heavier than the mug in his hands. He'd made a choice, and now he had to live inside it. Soft scrape came from the porch again. Ethan's shoulders tightened. He didn't rush to the window this time. He listened first. The house made little sounds as it cooled, ticks in the heating vent, the low hum of the space heater, the faint rattle of a loose pane. Then, through all of it, he heard the slow padding outside, steady as a metronome. The coyote hadn't left. It had simply widened its circle. Ethan stared at the phone on the table like it might grow signal out of spite. He thought of calling a neighbor, but the nearest one was miles away. He thought of the kind of services people talk about in town: emergency wildlife removal, a home security system with motion lights, a good homeowner's insurance policy that covers storm damage, and he almost laughed at the uselessness of it all in a whiteout. Out here, you didn't get a quick contractor. You didn't get an overnight HVAC repair. You got what you had in your own hands, and whatever God decided to allow in the corner. The bobcat shifted, and a low sound rolled out of her chest. Soft, warning, not quite a growl. Ethan followed her gaze. The porch light leaked under the door in a thin stripe, and in that stripe, a shadow moved. A nose pressed close enough that Ethan imagined the damp heat of its breath on the wood. Then the coffee cans he'd hung outside gave a tiny, nervous rattle. Ethan stood slowly and picked up the flashlight. His palm was sweaty despite the cold. He didn't shout. He didn't stop. He only clicked the beam on and aimed it at the door, as if the light itself could draw a line. The bobcat didn't run. She didn't hide. She simply lifted her head higher, ears forward, body angled between Ethan and the door, like a promise she hadn't spoken. And for the first time that night, Ethan felt something unfamiliar in the middle of his fear, an ache that wasn't only worry. It was responsibility. He hadn't just opened his door to save a life. He'd opened it to a mother who was preparing to bring more lives into the world, right there in his kitchen corner, while a hungry shadow waited outside. Toward dawn, the cold got mean, not the honest kind of cold that makes snow squeak under your boots, but a sneaky, creeping chill that slid under the door and settled into your bones. Ethan could feel it in his knees, in his shoulders, in the old ache between his shoulder blades that flared every winter like a warning light. The space heater was still running, humming softly, but the cabin's corners stayed bitter, the air thin and sharp. He kept thinking about the bobcat's kittens, about how she was building that nest with such slow purpose. If the temperature dropped much more, it wouldn't just be uncomfortable, it could be deadly. Ethan stood at the thermostat, frowned, and made the decision he'd been putting off. He pulled the small propane heater from the mudroom closet, the one he kept for outages and just in case nights. The metal casing was cold enough to sting his fingers. When he twisted the knob and struck the igniter, the flame caught with a dry whoosh, and a ribbon of heat began to unfurl across the room. The warmth felt good immediately, like relief, like a blanket. The kind of comfort you might pay for without thinking when you're older, and you've learned what cold can do to a body. He cracked a window the way you're supposed to, just a finger's width. The storm shoved at it, whining through the gap, bringing in snow dust that glittered in the lamplight. Ethan figured that was enough. He told himself he'd watched enough safety videos, read enough fine print on labels to do this right. The bobcat didn't move. She lay tucked into the corner, eyes open, breathing slow, her belly rising and falling like a tide. The cabin, for the first time in hours, felt almost normal. Lamplight, wood, heat, and the steady hush of winter outside. Ethan sank into his chair and let his eyelids fall. Just for a minute, he thought, but the minute stretched. The warmth softened his limbs. His thoughts drifted, heavy and slow, like sinking into deep water. His head nodded forward. The mug on the table cooled. The edges of the room seemed to blur. Something nudged the air. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. The light felt too bright. His tongue felt thick, like he'd been chewing cotton. His forehead was damp. He tried to draw a full breath and couldn't. The air had changed. Still warm, but wrong. Sweet in a way it shouldn't be. Faintly chemical, like plastic heating up. He sat up straighter, blinking, confused. Then the bobcat erupted from the corner. Not in panic exactly, in urgency. She came out low and fast, nails clicking on wood, and stopped short of Ethan with a sharp, raspy sound that raised every hair on his arms. Before he could react, she reached out with one paw and hooked at his pant leg, hard enough to tug fabric, not hard enough to tear. Again, then again. Her eyes were wide, fixed on him, and her ears were pinned forward like arrows. "Hey," Ethan started, voice thick. She did it again, a quick pull, then turned her head toward the window and the door, like she was pointing. Ethan's stomach rolled. He tried to stand, and the room tipped sideways. A wave of dizziness hit so hard he had to grab the table. The propane heater hissed softly in the corner, steady, innocent sounding. But the air in his lungs felt thin, like breathing through cloth. He stumbled to the door and fumbled the deadbolt. The metal was cold against his clammy fingers. When he cracked the door open, the storm punched him in the face, raw, icy wind that burned his cheeks and snapped him awake like a slap. Snow blew into the entryway, bright and sharp. Ethan sucked in that brutal air like it was medicine. Behind him, the Bobcat stood between him and the heater, shoulders squared, head lifted, not backing away until he had fully opened the door and the cabin began to clear. Ethan coughed, deep and ragged, and the sound echoed off the walls. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes watering, feeling the cold bite into his skin. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, steel gray, the color of old pewter. The storm was still there, but its darkness was thinning. Inside, the Bobcat's gaze didn't leave his face. She made one low sound, softer now, almost impatient, as if to say, "Not yet, stay awake." Ethan stared at her, breath coming in hard clouds. He had opened his door to save her from the cold and the coyote. And in return, she had just dragged him back from something invisible, something no flashlight beam could scare away. After the cold air cleared his head, Ethan shut the door again, gently this time, and turned the propane heater down until it was barely breathing. He cracked the window wider, letting a thin blade of winter cut into the room. The fresh air smelled like pine pitch and clean ice, and it stung his nostrils in a way that told his body, "Stay awake, don't drift." The Bobcat had returned to her corner, but she wasn't resting the same way anymore. Her breathing had changed. It came in quick pulls, then long pauses, as if she was bracing against something rising inside her. She shifted, stood, turned in a tight circle, then lowered herself again, claws catching softly on the quilt. A low, strained sound slipped out of her throat, more pain than warning. Ethan's hands were still shaking when he picked up his phone. He paced near the window, searching for a bar of signal the way you search for a lost key in a dark coat pocket. One bar flickered. 2. Then back to 1. He dialed the only number he could think of from a flyer he'd seen at the feed store. Maya Brooks, Wildlife Rehabilitation. He expected voicemail. Instead, a woman's voice came through, muffled by static. "Hello? Maya, this is Ethan Walker," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm off County Road 12, near the old logging cut. I've got a bobcat, pregnant, hurt paw. She's in my cabin." There was a beat of silence, then a sharp inhale. "You did what?" "I know," Ethan said, and he almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. "A coyote's been circling. She was freezing on my porch. I didn't have time." Maya's voice softened, but her words stayed practical, like someone who'd learned the hard way. "You can't handle her, you can't touch her, and you can't keep her warm with bad air. You hear me? Keep ventilation. I'm trying to get out, but the plows can't clear my road yet." "Is there an emergency vet I should call?" Ethan asked, thinking of the torn paw, the blood on his steps. "If she's laboring, she needs quiet more than anything," Maya said. "If you can do one thing, you keep the room calm and keep predators away. I'll come the moment I can. I'm serious." The call cut out on a burst of static. Ethan stared at the dead screen, the cabin suddenly feeling too still. Outside, the storm had gone from black to a bruised gray, the kind of early morning light that makes everything look drained of color. Inside, the lamp cast a warm pool on the floor, but it couldn't reach the corner where the bobcat moved. She stood again. Her belly tightened visibly, and her tail flicked low. She crouched, then rose, breathing faster. Ethan could hear it, wet, shallow breaths, the soft scrape of fabric, the faint click of nails. He kept his distance, hands open, feeling useless in the most human way. A yip sounded outside, closer than before. Ethan's stomach turned. He grabbed the flashlight and aimed it at the window, then at the door, listening for the porch cans. The cabin's wooden frame gave a low groan as the wind shifted. Somewhere out in the white, the coyote paced, patient and hungry. Ethan thought about how people in town talked about home security systems and insurance claims like they were answers to fear. None of that mattered right now. The only real protection he had was light, noise, and staying awake. In the corner, the bobcat lowered herself and went still. For a moment, there was only the storm and Ethan's heartbeat. Then a small sound rose above everything, thin as a thread, fragile, unmistakably alive. Another followed, then a third, even softer, like a question whispered into the world. Ethan didn't move. His eyes stung. He swallowed hard, tasting salt and coffee and cold air. 3 tiny bobcat kittens, born in the shadow of his kitchen cabinets while a predator waited outside his door. And Ethan realized something that made his chest ache. The night wasn't over. Now there was more to defend than one life. By late morning, the storm had eased into a steady fall, the kind that muffles everything and makes the world feel wrapped in cotton. The sky stayed a flat pewter gray, and the woods beyond Ethan's porch looked like charcoal sketches. Pine trunks, snow-laden branches, and the faint, ghostly lines of drifts. Inside, the cabin held a thin, nervous warmth. The window was cracked for clean air, so the room carried that bite of winter, sharp enough to keep Ethan awake. In the kitchen corner, the bobcat lay curled around 3 tiny bodies. The kittens were barely more than warm fists of fur, darker than their mother, faces pressed into her belly, making faint, hungry squeaks that sounded like rubbing a fingertip on glass. Ethan couldn't stop listening to those little noises. They made the whole night feel real in a way his own fear hadn't. He was rinsing a bowl at the sink when the porch cans rattled once, quick, deliberate, not the wind. Ethan froze, water still running, his heart thumping hard enough to make his palms sweat. Another sound followed, a firm knock on the door. Ethan's first thought was the coyote. His second thought was worse. What if someone had tracked the bobcat's scent and decided to finish the job? He shut off the faucet and moved quietly to the window, lifting the curtain a fraction. A snowmobile sat crooked in the yard, its engine ticking as it cooled. A man stood on the porch in a heavy parka, face pink with cold, a sheriff's badge catching the porch light even in the daytime gloom. He held his gloved hands up, palms out, the universal sign for, "I'm not here to start trouble." "Ethan Walker," the man called. His voice was calm but carried weight. "Deputy Ryan Cole, County Sheriff's Department. You called something in last night. At least we got half a call and a lot of static." Ethan's stomach sank. He opened the door only as far as the chain allowed, the cold air slipping in like a knife. "Deputy," he said, keeping his tone respectful, "I didn't mean to waste anybody's time. The storm." Ryan leaned closer, eyes scanning the porch, the snow, the faint rust-colored smear that still stained one step. "You didn't waste my time," he said, and his gaze sharpened. "What happened here?" Ethan hesitated. He could smell the deputy's cologne under the winter air, clean, spicy, something that reminded Ethan of barber shops and church halls. It felt strange, that human smell next to the wild scent inside his cabin. "There's a bobcat in my house," Ethan said quietly. The deputy's expression didn't change much, but something in his jaw tightened. "A what?" "She was freezing on my porch," Ethan said. "Pregnant. Hurt. A coyote's been circling all night. I brought her in. I called a rehabber, Maya Brooks. She's trying to get here." Ryan's eyes flicked past Ethan's shoulder into the dim cabin. The chain kept the gap small, but it was enough. From the corner came one soft squeak, high and thin. Ryan heard it. His face went still. "You've got kittens," he said. Ethan nodded once, throat tight. 3. For a moment, the only sound was the hush of falling snow and the distant creak of trees, shifting under weight. Then Ryan exhaled slowly, fogging the air. "Ethan," he said, voice lower now, "I'm not here to be the bad guy. But you understand what this looks like. If that cat panics, she can tear you up. If she gets out and somebody's dog gets hurt or a neighbor gets bit, this turns into liability fast. Medical bills, lawsuits. It's not just you on the line." The words hit Ethan like a cold splash. Liability, lawsuit, medical. They were the kind of worries people his age talked about over coffee. The kind of things that made you grateful you'd kept up with health insurance and saved for emergencies. The kind of problems that could wreck a person even if no one died. "I get it," Ethan said, "but if you force her out right now, she'll die, or the kittens will." Ryan looked out toward the tree line, where the storm had thinned enough to show a faint track line. "And that coyote?" Ethan's eyes followed. A dark shape moved far off, then vanished behind a drift. "Still out there," Ethan admitted. Ryan's mouth tightened. He glanced back at Ethan, then at the door. "All right," he said, and there was a reluctant edge to it, like he was choosing the least bad option. "Here's what we're not doing. We're not opening that door wide. We're not touching her, and we're not turning your cabin into a petting zoo." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Ryan stepped down off the porch and walked the perimeter, boots crunching in the snow. He pointed to fresh prints near the woodpile, then to a spot near the trash cans. "He's bold," Ryan said. "Hungry. That's why he keeps coming." He dug into his sled bag and pulled out a small bottle and a rag. "This isn't magic," he said, "but it'll buy you space." He dabbed the rag and placed it in a shallow tin near the porch edge, far enough from the door that the smell wouldn't seep inside. The sharp, biting scent hit Ethan even through the crack, ammonia like cleaning solution. The kind of smell that makes your eyes water and your nose burn. "Predators don't like it," Ryan said. "It won't hurt him. It just tells him this spot isn't worth it." Ethan nodded, absorbing every word like a man taking instructions before a storm repair. "Thank you." Ryan looked at him for a long second, then said, "I'm calling this in. Wildlife resources, too. And you call Maya again as soon as you can. This ends with that bobcat back in the woods, Ethan. You hear me?" "I hear you," Ethan said. Ryan stepped back onto the porch, his voice softer. "And for what it's worth," he added, "most folks would have locked the door and let nature do what it does." Ethan didn't answer. He just stood there, feeling the warmth of the cabin behind him and the cold law of winter in front of him. Two worlds pressed together at the width of a chain. Inside, the kittens squeaked again, and the bobcat let out a low, protective sound that made Ethan's skin prickle. Now the danger wasn't only the coyote. Now it was time, rules, and the kind of decisions that follow you long after the snow melts. Maya Brooks arrived 2 days later when the county plows finally punched a narrow path through the drifts and the world stopped looking like one endless sheet of white. Her SUV crunched into Ethan's yard, tires squealing on packed snow. When she stepped onto the porch, she smelled like cold air and peppermint gum, and her eyes went straight to the door as if she could already hear what was inside. Ethan let her in without ceremony. The cabin had that lived-in scent now, coffee, wood smoke from earlier, and the faint, clean musk of wild fur. In the kitchen corner, the bobcat's gaze lifted, steady and tired, her body curved like a shelter around 3 kittens that were finally loud enough to sound real. Their tiny squeaks had turned into little complaints, hungry and insistent, the kind of noise that makes a human heart tighten even when it knows better. Maya didn't rush. She didn't coo. She moved with the calm of someone who'd seen fear go wrong. "We keep this quiet," she said under her breath. No touching, no pictures, no sudden movements. She glanced at the cracked window, nodded approval, then at the propane heater. Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks anyway. He began. I know, Maya said, not unkindly. You're alive. That's the point. She unpacked a hard-sided den box, lined with straw, and a clean blanket that smelled like sun-dried cotton, and she placed it just inside the back door where the light stayed dim. She explained the plan in simple steps like an emergency home repair checklist. Keep distance, keep ventilation, feed from far away with tongs, and move the den box outside only when the weather gave them a clean window. And Ethan, she added, go buy a carbon monoxide detector the minute you can. This isn't negotiable. Same way you wouldn't skip homeowner's insurance and hope for the best. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. He'd lived his life lately like a man who thought he could outrun bad luck by keeping things small. This storm had proved otherwise. That afternoon, Deputy Ryan Cole returned on his snowmobile with a folded paper map and a quiet seriousness. I walked your back lot, he said. His gloved finger tapped a spot behind the woodpile. The coyote's not your biggest concern anymore. He didn't say it dramatically. He didn't need to. He only showed Ethan the prints, wide, deep, too heavy, and too clean-edged to be a dog, the kind of track that made the woods feel older than any human rule. A wolf had come through while the storm was easing, drawn by scent and sound, and then moved on. Maya's eyes narrowed. That means we don't linger, she said. We transition and we're done. On the third night, the air turned calmer. The sky cleared into a hard, starry black, and the snow outside glittered like crushed glass under the porch light. Maya and Ethan carried the den box to the tree line together, slow and careful, while Ryan stood watch with a flashlight and the kind of stillness that comes from years of knowing what darkness can hold. The wood smelled sharp and clean, and the cold bit Ethan's cheeks until they burned. They set the den box beneath a low tangle of cedar where the wind couldn't reach it easily. Maya placed a small trail camera nearby, its plastic casing dull and dark, a quiet witness. This is how we do it, she said. We help without keeping. Ethan opened the back door and stepped away. He didn't call. He didn't lure. He only made space. The bobcat appeared in the doorway like a shadow cut out of the lamplight. For a long moment she didn't move, her ears tilted forward, listening to the forest and the faint, distant yip of something that still hadn't forgotten. Ethan could hear his own breathing, slow and white in the cold. His hands were open at his sides, empty. Then she stepped out. She moved with her kittens one by one, carrying each tiny life in her mouth with a tenderness that looked almost impossible on a face built for hunting. She vanished into the cedar, then returned again and again until the kitchen corner was empty, and the cabin felt suddenly too bright, too quiet. On her last trip, she paused at the threshold. The porch light painted a warm line along her frost-dusted fur. She turned her head slightly, not a human gesture, not gratitude, the way people want it, but something like recognition, like she was marking the scent of the place where she had made a choice to trust. Ethan didn't move. His throat tightened anyway. She slipped into the dark, and the forest swallowed her whole. A week later, Maya texted Ethan a single photo from the trail camera. 3 kittens, bigger now, wobbling after their mother through fresh snow, their little tails held high. Another image followed, the bobcat standing still at the edge of the frame, looking toward the cabin's direction, then turning away, leading them deeper into the trees. Ethan stared at the screen until his vision blurred. He thought about medical bills and liability, and how close he'd come to leaving this world over bad air and exhaustion. He thought about the way a home security system can't protect you from what you carry inside your own chest. and he understood the unbelievable truth that no one would believe if they hadn't lived it. He had opened his door to save a freezing pregnant bobcat. But she was the one who had kept him alive long enough to become the kind of man who could let go. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.